The first time Zara sat beside me in the observation room and whispered, "He's lying about how long he spends on that screen." She wasn't talking to me. She was narrating to herself. I just happened to be the one sitting there, and I just happened to have stopped watching the test participant 20 seconds earlier. I was watching her instead. She caught me on the third whisper, turned her head, saw where my eyes were, and held very still for a beat the way people do when they've just found something unexpected. Then her mouth curved. "You're not watching the user," she said. "I'm watching the researcher," I said. "It's adjacent." Her name was Zara Chen, 27, UX researcher at Groundwork Labs, a small accessibility software company in Vancouver's Mount Pleasant neighborhood. She'd moved from Montreal 8 months ago, and in that time she had developed a very precise habit of being exactly as perceptive as was inconvenient for me personally. My name is Leo Ashby. I'm 28, a product data analyst. I track where users get confused, where they give up, and where they succeed without realizing it. In other words, I'm paid to notice patterns. The pattern with Zara had been obvious since January, and I had been professionally ignoring it since February. Partly because she was our lead UX researcher. Sharp, methodical, the kind of person who could find the flaw in your logic before you'd finished explaining it, and then hand it back to you wrapped in a question so you thought you'd found it yourself. Partly because office relationships are a bad idea in a company of 38 people where there are exactly 2 bathrooms. And partly because 2 years ago in Halifax, I'd thought I was reading signals correctly. I wasn't. The other person was kind about it. Some of our colleagues were not. I'd spent 6 weeks being the subject of very gentle, very relentless jokes. I moved to Vancouver for a better job, partly also to be somewhere no one had witnessed that. So I had rules. Don't assume. Don't stare. If something feels like flirting, assume it's just how she talks to everyone. Zara made those rules feel like I'd built them out of wet cardboard by the end of her first month. She borrowed my notes from Tuesday stand-ups and returned them with small corrections in the margins in a different color pen. She remembered I hated the lobby coffee and once left a proper cup from the place on Kingsway on my desk, with a sticky note that just said altitude matters. She argued our product director, Trina, into crediting a junior researcher named Damien. For a usability insight 3 people had talked over. She twisted a thin brass ring around her index finger when she was thinking hard. She stood beside me at the whiteboard instead of across from me because, in her words, I'm not shouting feedback at you like we're in different time zones. We were in different time zones once. She'd presented from a hotel room in Ottawa during a federal accessibility audit, and she texted me at 11 p.m. Vancouver time, 2 a.m. her time, to ask if a particular bar graph looked too aggressive. I said it looked fine. She said, "That's a non-answer." I said, "The graph is clear. Whether it reads as aggressive depends on who's in the room." She replied, "You're actually useful sometimes." I stared at that for longer than I should have. In the observation room, after catching me not watching the test, she didn't make it a thing. She just turned back to the one-way glass and said, "His hesitation pattern on the payment screen is different from the others. He's nervous about the cost, not the interface." Then she tore a piece from her granola bar and handed it to me without looking away from the glass. I ate it. I looked at the monitor this time, but I was aware of exactly how close her shoulder was to mine, and I was aware that she knew I was aware, and neither of us said anything about it, which was somehow worse. Groundwork Labs made software that helped buildings meet BC's accessibility compliance standards. Not glamorous. Not the kind of startup that gets covered in tech media, but necessary work done by people who actually gave a damn about it. We had a pitch coming up, the BC Tech Innovation Fund, a provincial grant that could cover 18 months of development. If we landed it, Trina could stop apologizing at all hands meetings about the snack budget. Zara had been building the human narrative for the deck for 3 weeks. I'd been building the data layer. We were presenting separately until the morning of the pitch, when Trina appeared in the doorway of the small meeting room, with the look of a woman carrying bad news and 3 too many coffees. "Bryce has food poisoning," she said. Bryce was our lead presenter. He had the slides, the timing, the room. Zara looked up from her laptop. "How bad?" He's not leaving his bathroom. So, it's quite bad. Trina dropped a printed deck in front of each of us. You two know the material better than anyone else in this office. You built it. I looked at Zara, she looked at me. We haven't rehearsed together, I said. You have 4 hours, Trina said, and left before either of us could argue. For a moment, the meeting room was quiet except for the rain against the windows, Vancouver doing what Vancouver does in March, and the distant sound of the SkyTrain on the elevated track a few blocks away. Zara pulled the deck toward her. Okay, she said. Your data section is too dense. Good morning to you too. I mean it. Slide 14 has 6 metrics. Grant reviewers aren't analysts. They're reading for story, not precision. Precision is the story. Precision is the evidence, she said. Story is what makes them care about the evidence. She looked up. You're good at this part, actually. You just bury it. I didn't know what to do with that, so I said, which part specifically? She slid the deck across the table and pointed. I looked. She wasn't wrong. We worked through lunch. She restructured the emotional arc of the opening. I rebuilt slide 14 into 3 slides. At some point, she stole half my sandwich without asking, which was so consistent with her character that I didn't even comment. At some point, I made her laugh, genuinely, not politely, by describing the worst user test I'd ever run, in which a participant spent 40 minutes navigating our beta with his elbow because he'd just painted his nails. That's in the retention notes, she said, still smiling. I know, I wrote them. She looked at me the way she sometimes did, directly, like she was cataloging something. You notice everything, don't you? It wasn't a question, I treated it like one anyway. It's the job. No, she said. The job is data. Noticing is different. She tapped her pen on the table once. You noticed the elbow. You noticed Damien's idea getting talked over. You noticed I was about to board the wrong SkyTrain line my second week here. I had. She'd been standing on the expo platform, staring at her phone with the focused expression of someone who didn't want to ask for help. I'd said, Millennium Line is upstairs, and kept walking before she could feel like a tourist. You didn't thank me, I said. I didn't realize it was you until a week later. A pause. Thank you. The rain thickened outside. In the hallway, someone laughed near the kitchenette. Zara and I stayed at the table in the particular quiet of 2 people who have run out of safe things to talk about. Then Trina knocked on the glass and pointed at her watch. By 3 o'clock, the rumor had already moved through the office the way rumors do in small offices. Not announced, just suddenly present like a smell. I heard it from Damien, who'd heard it from someone in engineering, who had apparently overheard us talking and made a series of creative assumptions. The rumor was that Zara and I were already together, had been, secretly for months, that this was why we'd been assigned to present together. For the record, Zara said when Trina told us, I don't secretly date people. Then publicly, Trina said, too tired for nuance. I don't care either way, I care about tomorrow. We're not dating, I said. The data would suggest otherwise. Damien offered helpfully from the doorway. Zara looked at him. He vanished. Trina sighed. Rehearsal in the boardroom at 4. Don't be weird about it. She left. Zara and I stood in the small corridor by the supply closet, which smelled like toner and the vague disappointment of a company that had ordered too many branded tote bags. She crossed her arms, then uncrossed them. For what it's worth, she said, I don't think you're weird. That's a very specific compliment. It's the one I have available right now. I almost said something real then, not a deflection, but my phone buzzed on the shelf beside me. Unknown number. Zara has an offer in Toronto. She's leaving after the presentation tomorrow. I read it twice, then once more. Your face changed, Zara said. Did it? Leo. I handed her the phone. She read it. Her jaw tightened slightly. Not much, but I had spent 6 months learning to read her face, and it was enough. Is it true? I asked. She handed the phone back. It's complicated. Which was not the same as no. The rehearsal went better than it had any right to. Zara opened with the story. A woman in Burnaby trying to find out if her apartment building was truly accessible before signing a lease, unable to get a clear answer from the building registry, wasting 6 hours across 3 phone lines. She made the room listen. Then she handed it to me, and I walked them through the data without doing what I usually do, which is treat the room like it needs to be educated. Afterward, Trina said, "That was good, annoyingly good." Zara gave a small bow. It was such a specific, precise gesture that I almost laughed. I didn't, because underneath the competence and the banter, the clock was running. Toronto. Leaving. After tomorrow. At 6:30, the office emptied out. I was packing my bag when Zara appeared at my desk, holding 2 coffee cups from the place on Kingsway. "Walk with me?" she said. We ended up at the False Creek waterfront. It had stopped raining, and the puddles reflected the string lights from Granville Island across the water. Zara bought bread from a food truck that had no business being that good. I got a butter chicken wrap and ate it standing up like a person with no plan and no table. She found us a wooden bench near the water. Herons moved on the rocks below us. The city hummed quietly the way Vancouver does on a clear evening, all mountains and glass and the distant horn of a ferry crossing toward North Van. She tore her sandwich in half and placed the larger piece on my lap without looking at me. "You always give me the bigger half," I said. She went still for a moment. I didn't realize I was doing it. "You've done it 3 times." She looked at the water. "I notice things too," she said. "It's not just you." Neither of us spoke. A couple walked past with a dog. Somewhere behind us, a kid on a skateboard made an optimistic and unsuccessful attempt at something involving the curb. "The Toronto offer," I said. She set down what was left of her half. "A UX research director role. At a firm I actually respect." She paused. "Good salary. The kind that would help with rent in a city that isn't Vancouver." A fair point. Vancouver rent was its own separate, ongoing catastrophe. "When do you have to decide?" "Tomorrow night." I nodded, said nothing. "Say something," she said. "I'm happy for you." "True, and I don't want you to go." "Also true." Those 2 things are currently having a disagreement somewhere in my chest, and I'm not sure who's winning. Zara turned to look at me. Really look. Her eyes were darker in the low light, and there was something unguarded in her face that I hadn't seen before, or hadn't let myself see. She reached across the space between us and put her hand over mine. "Not an accident, not a joke." "I notice you," she said quietly, "more than makes professional sense." I turned my hand and held hers. Then I'm in good company. Her thumb moved once across my hand. "If I leave, I don't want you thinking you imagined this." "Then don't," I said. "Leave me thinking, I mean." Her phone buzzed on the bench. She glanced at it. Something shifted in her expression, quick, then controlled. I looked before I could stop myself. A text from a contact saved as Warren. "Don't sign anything with groundwork tomorrow. We need to talk about Leo." The water moved quietly below us. I still had her hand, or she still had mine. Neither of us let go immediately. "Who's Warren?" I asked. "My old director, from my previous firm in Calgary. The one connected to the Toronto offer. He's consulting at the firm. He knows I'm presenting with you tomorrow because I mentioned it." She turned her phone face down on the bench. "I may have mentioned you more than once. Not strategically. You just came up." I had no useful response to that, so I sat with it. "He's the kind of person," I said eventually, "who thinks knowing something about your life gives him the right to manage it." She exhaled slowly. "That's very accurate. Is there something I should know?" She stood, pulled her coat tighter, and I stood too, and we walked. Not toward anything. Just along the water, past the heron still standing on its rock like it had strong opinions about all of this. "At my last firm," she said, "we had a project, a non-profit contract, transitional housing for youth aging out of provincial care. The client was called Harlow Street Housing." "I've heard of them," I said. "They do good work." "They do. We were doing UX research for their new tenant portal, helping people find out what services they qualified for, how to apply for support, that kind of thing." She paused. "Warren was senior strategy. He came to me 6 weeks before launch with a proposal. Some of our research had flagged that the portal wasn't meeting certain accessibility standards. He wanted to reframe the numbers." I felt my stomach drop. "Reframe how?" "Leave out the sessions with participants who used screen readers. Adjust the task completion rates by excluding what he called outlier users." Her voice was steady. the kind of steady that costs something. In other words, the users the software was most failing. That's not a reframe, I said. That's fabrication. I know, I told him that. She stopped walking. He told me I was being precious, that the portal would help more people than it hurt, and that I was letting perfectionism get in the way of practical good. I said something quiet and unflattering about Warren that I won't repeat here. I went to the Harlow Street director directly, Zara continued. Showed her the full data. She pulled the contract. She looked at me sideways. My firm lost a significant account. Warren told everyone I'd sabotaged the project because I couldn't handle the pressure, that I was too idealistic to do serious work. That's not what happened. She stopped. No, it isn't. You protected the people the software was supposed to serve. She looked at me in the low light. Her expression was something I didn't have a word for, not quite surprise, but close. Like she'd rehearsed a response to skepticism and hadn't prepared one for the alternative. Warren still tells his version, she said. The consulting firm in Toronto, he's there. He vouched for me for the offer. But I think he also wants to manage what I do with it. And apparently that includes who I trust. I thought about the anonymous text on my phone, about Warren sending messages to her at 7 p.m. The text I got, I said, about you leaving. Zara's face changed. What? I showed her. She read it, then looked up. That wasn't Warren's number. Unknown number, yes. She was quiet. Then, he has a contact at Groundwork, someone who knew we were presenting together. She handed my phone back. He does this, moves pieces around like it's a board game. I looked at the Granville Island lights reflected on the water. He's trying to get you to Toronto and get me to distrust you before the pitch. Two birds, she said quietly. Is it working? She looked at me. Is it? I took her hand again. No. Her shoulders dropped slightly, almost imperceptibly, like she'd been holding something she hadn't realized she was holding. We walked back toward her building, a low rise on a quiet street in Mount Pleasant, ivy climbing the east wall, a recycling bin with someone else's junk mail jammed into it. At her door, we stopped, like the night had simply run out of sideshock. Warren may show up tomorrow, she said. He's consulting with the grant committee this quarter. Of course he is. He'll try to rattle me. Then we'll make it very boring for him to watch. I said it steadier than I felt. She studied me a moment. Then she stepped forward, put both hands flat against my chest, and kissed me. Not the impulsive kind, the deliberate kind, the kind that is itself a decision. I kissed her back. I had apparently been saving up for it. When we separated, she kept her hands where they were. That was not nothing, she said. I'm aware. I'm not leaving because of a text from Warren. Good. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. I walked 2 blocks toward the SkyTrain before my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. Ask Zara what happened at Harlow Street before you stand beside her tomorrow. I turned around. She was already holding the building door when I buzzed. A pause, then the lock clicked. She met me in the stairwell in her socks and an old Concordia sweatshirt, hair loose. It was somehow the most honest I'd seen her look. What happened? She said. I showed her the message. She went pale. That's him. He must have a second number. She pressed her palm flat against the painted cinder block wall. Leo, whatever version he's going to tell you. I know what happened, I said. You told me. She blinked. I believe you, I said. You don't need to argue the case. For a moment she just looked at me. Then she said very quietly, you didn't even ask for documentation. Do you have documentation? Yes. Good. I don't need it tonight. I found a small smile. I love documentation. Professionally, we have a committed relationship, but you're not on trial here. She made a sound that was neither quite a laugh nor quite not one. Then she took my hand and pulled me upstairs. Her apartment was warm and genuinely hers. Plants on the deep windowsill. A Montreal Metro map print leaning against the wall like it hadn't found the right spot yet. 3 notebooks open on the kitchen table, a yellow kettle on the stove. It suited her so exactly that I had to look at the kettle for a moment so I'd have somewhere safe to put my face. She stood at the window, with her arms crossed. I'm scared, she said, of Warren being in that room. Of letting him be right about me, not the facts, but the version of myself where I make the emotional choice, and it costs something. What's the emotional choice? Staying here, turning down Toronto. She looked at her hands. Choosing something that isn't yet certain. I crossed the room, stopped close enough that she had to look up. Then let's make tomorrow so clear, I said, that the only version anyone walks away with is the true one. Her expression softened in a way that undid me a little. That's either a plan or a promise. Both, I said. She kissed me again. This one I won't try to describe. Some things are better left without adjectives. We spent the next hour at her kitchen table, with tea going cold beside us, rebuilding the presentation's spine, not the slides but the logic beneath them. Her instinct for narrative, my instinct for proof. By 11, we had something cleaner and truer than anything we'd built separately. At her door, she gripped my collar. Don't spiral tonight. I don't spiral. You absolutely spiral. You just do it with spreadsheets. That's just normal data work. At 11 p.m., I conceded the point. She kissed me once more, brief like a bookmark, and told me to go home. I went home. I slept, which surprised me. In the morning, she was at my desk before 9 with 2 cups from the place on Kingsway. She wore a navy blazer over a soft gray top, her hair done differently than usual. I'm not qualified to describe it precisely, only to note that focusing on slide transitions became substantially more difficult. You're staring, she said. I'm noticing. She smiled, small private. Then she set a cup in front of me. Good morning, Leo. Try not to fall apart until at least after the Q&A. Encouraging. Honest. She adjusted my jacket collar. I was already wearing it. Her hand stayed there 1 beat longer than necessary. Someone across the open office definitely saw. I didn't move away. Neither did she. Ready, she said. Yes, I said. We walked into the boardroom together. 4 reviewers from the BC Tech Innovation Fund. 2 observers. 12 chairs around the table. And in the seat beside the lead reviewer, wearing a navy suit and the unhurried ease of a man who'd never been surprised in a room like this, Warren. He looked at Zara, he looked at me, he looked at the space between us. Zara, he said, and you must be Leo. I've heard a great deal about this partnership. 1 breath. 2. Zara said, Warren, her voice was even. I didn't see you on the panel list. Late addition. Consulting for the fund this quarter. He spread his hands, lucky timing. I stepped to my place beside the screen. Zara stepped to hers. Our arms nearly touched. Let him watch, I thought. Zara opened the deck. At 7 a.m. this past Tuesday, she said, a woman in Burnaby found out that her apartment building had failed its last 2 accessibility audits. She found out because of our software, not from a legal notice after the fact, not from a 6-hour phone chain, from 30 seconds and a postal code. She paused, and I watched the reviewers lean into it. Your tenants aren't waiting for systems to catch up. They're making decisions today. Where to live, whether they can manage a staircase, whether they can afford the time to find out. We think they deserve better than a phone chain. The room changed. I've been in enough presentations to feel it. The moment air shifts from evaluation to attention. She handed it to me with a glance that said, your turn. I stepped forward, walked them through the data, error rates, task completion by user profile, time to information across different assistive technology configurations. No jargon, no hiding behind density. 3 slides instead of 14. Every number with a purpose. Then Warren raised his hand. This is a compelling story, he said pleasantly, but small shops often struggle with provincial scale deployment. In my experience, research leads who prioritize the emotional narrative over operational rigor can run into trouble when real-world variables get complicated. He glanced at Zara. Idealistic framings don't always survive contact with a larger mandate. There it was, Harlow Street, dressed in committee language. I watched Zara. She looked at the table, inhaled once slow. Then she looked directly at Warren. Operational rigor is exactly why we kept the full dataset, she said. The users most likely to struggle with the system are the ones most likely to need it. Removing them from our metrics doesn't make the software better. It makes the metrics look better. She clicked to the next slide. Every number Leo is about to show you includes screen reader sessions, voice navigation sessions, and low bandwidth device users. If those numbers hold, it's because the product actually holds. Warren's expression didn't shift. Caution has its place. It isn't always a competitive advantage. I'm not cautious, Zara said. I'm accurate. She looked at the lead reviewer, a woman named Dr. Park who had not moved in 15 minutes except to write. There's a difference. I stepped forward. We tested two approaches to the onboarding flow, I said. An urgency-led design and a clarity-led design. Urgency increased first session clicks by 11%. Clarity increased return visits by 34%. Help desk escalations dropped by half. I clicked once. The chart appeared. The data suggests accuracy outperforms urgency for this user population, which is exactly what Zara's research predicted. I let that sit. Warren didn't speak again. When we finished, Dr. Park looked up from her notebook. That's the most transparent methodology presentation we've seen this cycle, she said. I appreciate the honesty about scope and limitations. She made a note. We have follow-up questions. Trina, standing near the back wall, made a very small sound. By noon, the fund had signaled they were moving to formal review, effectively a yes. By 12:15, Warren had collected his portfolio and left without saying goodbye. By 12:30, Trina had sent us to go look humble somewhere private, which meant the small meeting room at the end of the hall. The door had barely closed when Zara exhaled. We did it, she said. Her voice was thin. You did it, I said. We, firm certain. Then she crossed the room and let me hold her. Not dramatically, just the way people hold each other when something tightly wound finally lets go. I kept my arms around her. The room smelled like dry erase markers and cold coffee. Outside, someone was talking too loudly about parking validation. I'm not taking the Toronto job, she said into my shoulder. My chest stopped, then started too hard. Zara. Don't tell me not to decide because of you. She pulled back to look at me. I'm not. I'm deciding because I don't want to work inside a structure where Warren's version of anything has authority. I'm deciding because I like what we're building here. She paused. And yes, I'm deciding because there's a person in this office who handed me back the bigger half of a situation without asking me to prove I deserved it first. I looked at her, said nothing useful, kissed her instead, right there between the whiteboard and the window and the ghost of every almost moment we'd left sitting on the table. Outside the glass wall, Damien walked past, stopped, and started backing up. Then there was whispering. Zara laughed against my mouth. I pressed my forehead to hers. HR disclosure form. Worth every checkbox, she said. The rumor changed after that. Not disappeared, changed. People stopped speculating about whether we were together and started asking Trina whether we could be kept in separate meeting blocks for productivity reasons. Trina said she'd think about it. That meant no. Damien asked if he could include interpersonal dynamics as a contributing factor in the grant presentation debrief. Zara told him she'd respond to his next research summary in a font he'd find personally confronting. 2 months later, Groundwork received the full grant. Trina promoted Zara to lead researcher with a salary that almost, not quite, but almost, made sense for Vancouver. I got a raise and the honor of no longer being the person whose slide 14 Zara corrected in the margins. She still corrected me occasionally. She was always right. 6 months after the pitch, the anonymous texts stopped. Zara mentioned over dinner one evening, quietly, that Warren had left the Toronto firm. The full Harlow Street data had apparently surfaced somewhere inconvenient for him. She said it without satisfaction, just stated it. Then changed the subject to whether the lemon chicken was too salty. I said it wasn't. She said I was being generous. I said I was being accurate. She threw a piece of bread at me that landed in my water glass, and we both laughed too loudly for the restaurant. A year after that morning in the observation room, when she caught me not watching the test, I came home to find Zara at the kitchen table, in her old Concordia sweatshirt, her hair up, reviewing accessibility guidelines for a new provincial housing registry. Pro bono, her idea, her evenings. She looked up when I came in. You're staring, she said. I'm noticing, I said. She held out her hand. I crossed the room and took it, and she pulled me down and kissed me under the kitchen light while rain moved over the city outside. The Montreal Metro print was on the wall now, finally in the right spot. The brass ring sat beside her notebook, catching the light while she worked. And for once, when Zara looked up and found me watching her, I didn't look away. I leaned in closer. What would you do if someone caught you noticing them, really noticing, and didn't look away either? Tell your story in the comments below. And if you'd like to be closer to Whispered someday, we've opened memberships where you find us shorter stories every week. No ads, just the good stuff. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.